The Last Curtain. I bought the Orpheum Theater because I thought old buildings deserved to be saved. That's what I told people anyway. The truth is, the moment I stepped inside the first time, as a boy on a school field trip, I felt something in its walls call out to me. Maybe it was the way the crimson curtains glowed like embers in the dim house lights, or how the air held a faint electric charge as though the building itself were breathing. The Orpheum was built in 1894, a palace of carved wood, velvet, and gold filigree. It had survived fires, bankruptcies, prohibition, several failed owners, and decades of neglect. When the previous owner put it up for auction, I emptied my savings and bought it without hesitation. I told myself I was rescuing an old friend. But now, alone in my office long after midnight, I sometimes wonder if it rescued me instead, dragging me into its history, whether I wanted it or not. Strange things began before I even signed the contract. During my initial walkthrough, I heard footsteps on the stage. Heavy, deliberate. I assumed a worker was doing repairs, so I called out. No reply. The footsteps stopped. When I stepped onto the stage to check, it was empty. The air felt colder there, though, so cold I could see my breath plume into the dimness. The theater manager, an older woman named Jean, noticed me looking around and said quietly, "It happens. Don't worry about it." She wouldn't elaborate. After I took ownership, I poured money into restoration, new wiring, reinforced beams, refinished woodwork. But I was careful never to erase the history, the gold leaf scrollwork, the velvet seats, the hand-painted ceiling mural depicting 9 muses floating above the audience. It was during those weeks of renovations that the cast and crew started complaining. Props moved in the night, ending up neatly arranged center stage as if awaiting rehearsal. Lights flickered in patterns that almost seemed like Morse code. Actors froze mid-sentence during run-throughs, claiming they'd heard someone whisper their name. And always, the footsteps, echoing across the stage, even when no one was on it. I kept reassuring everyone it was just the building settling, or electrical quirks, or stress. But I didn't believe that myself. About 3 months after renovations began, I saw him for the first time. It was late, close to 2 a.m. I'd stayed behind to finalize payroll. The building had been locked for hours. The only lights on were my office lamp and one dim bulb that hung above the stage. When I stood to stretch, something told me to look toward the auditorium. The theater yawned open before me, rows of empty seats fading into darkness. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then, my eyes caught movement in the upper balcony, someone standing behind the railing, a silhouette, perfectly still. I froze. The figure was tall, wearing what looked like a long coat or cloak. I couldn't see a face, only the faint outline of a head tilted slightly downward, watching the stage. My heart thudded painfully. I opened my mouth to call out, but before a sound left my lips, the figure slowly stepped back into the darkness until it disappeared entirely. I hurried out to the lobby and up the stairs, fumbling with my keys as I unlocked the balcony doors. I swept the entire level. Nothing. No footprints in the dust on the old runner, no signs of forced entry, but the railing was cold, freezing cold, like ice. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I asked Jean if she had ever seen anything unusual. She stiffened, like she'd been expecting the question. "The Orpheum has a personality," she said carefully. "Some of us think it remembers its past." "What does that mean?" "There was an actor," she said, lowering her voice. "A long time ago, early 1900s, brilliant performer, brilliant, but troubled. During the final performance of The King in Yellow, he snapped." She hesitated. He walked to center stage at the end of Act 1, looked up at the balcony, smiled, and then slit his own throat in front of a full house. I stared at her in horror. They say he did it because he heard someone calling him, she finished. And people still see him? Joan didn't answer. She only gave me a tired look, the kind people reserve for lost causes. Our first major production under my ownership was The Winter's Tale. We were 2 days from opening night when things escalated. During dress rehearsal, the lead actress, Marissa, froze mid-monologue. Her eyes locked on the balcony, wide with terror. "He's looking at me," she whispered. The entire cast followed her gaze. Someone stood there, a pale shape, too tall, too rigid to be human. Before I could speak, the figure drifted, not walked, along the balcony rail. Its long coat fluttered, though there was no breeze. Then it melted into the wall and vanished. Marissa collapsed. The cast begged me to cancel the show. We took a break instead, and I paced behind the curtains, trying to collect myself. That was when I smelled it. Perfume, old-fashioned, sweet and powdery, like violets crushed into talc. The scent flowed past me and onto the stage. I stepped out after it. The theater was silent, empty. But on the center of the stage lay something new. A single playing card, a yellowed card with ornate black script. The last curtain. I didn't recognize it from any deck I'd ever seen. Opening night arrived, whether I was ready or not. Miraculously, most of the cast returned. Superstition outweighed fear, I guess, and performers crave an audience. I busied myself backstage, pretending everything was normal. The house lights dimmed. Act 1 began. As the actors performed, I hovered just off stage, nerves frayed to threads. Every creak of the building felt amplified. Every shadow felt aware of itself. Midway through the act, I sensed someone standing behind me. I don't know why, but I already knew who it was. When I turned, the tall man from the balcony stood only a few feet away. His face was gray and gaunt, lips darkened as though stitched shut. His eyes, sunken and lifeless, were fixed on me with chilling intensity. He raised one hand, impossibly long fingers pointing toward center stage. I shook my head without speaking, backing away. But he stepped forward, passing straight through a velvet curtain, the fabric rippling like water around him. He moved to the middle of the stage. The actors stopped. The audience gasped. The theater went dead silent. The ghost slowly lifted both arms as though preparing for a bow. And then, in a voice like dry leaves scraping across stone, he whispered, "It's time." The house lights exploded into brightness. The sound system screamed with feedback. The entire building shuddered like something massive had struck it. And just as suddenly, everything went dark. When light finally returned, the stage was empty. The ghost was gone. The audience murmured, confused. Some thought it was a special effect. Others rushed for the exits. But the actors, they knew. Marissa quit the next morning. 3 others followed. The production was canceled. The Orpheum has been quiet ever since, but only on the surface. Some nights, when I'm alone and the wind rattles the doors, I hear those familiar footsteps crossing the stage. Slow, heavy, purposeful. He's still waiting for his final bow. And sometimes, on the edge of sleep, I sense him standing at the foot of my bed, watching me with those dead, patient eyes. I think he knows something I don't. Or maybe he's just waiting for me to listen. After all, the Orpheum always remembers its past. And now, whether I like it or not, I'm part of it. I always volunteered for close. I told the manager I didn't mind, said I liked the quiet, the routine, the time to myself after a long day at the Majestic. That was partly true. I did like walking the old aisles when the crowds were gone, threading through drifting popcorn smells and the warm hum of the projectors cooling down. But the other truth, the one I didn't say out loud, was that I didn't like the idea of anyone else being alone in that building after dark. It never felt right, especially not tonight. It was December 1974, and the Majestic had just finished its 6th showing of Black Christmas. Every seat had been filled. People screamed, laughed nervously, clutched their coats tighter. When the lights came up, they all rushed out, chattering and pale, leaving the aisles littered with candy wrappers and half-finished soda cups. A typical night. Except it wasn't. There had been a moment during the final scenes when I had stepped inside the auditorium to check the volume levels. The room was pitch dark except for the flicker of the screen. Olivia Hussey's terrified face strobing across the audience. The theater looked normal, except someone was sitting in row H. Seat 12, I think. That seat had been empty before, I was sure of it. And whoever sat there didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even look at the screen. They were angled slightly toward the aisle like they were waiting for someone to come close. I only saw their silhouette, but there was something wrong in the stillness, something stiff and mechanical about the way their heads stayed turned. When I flipped on the house lights after the credits, row H was empty. I told myself they'd just slipped out fast. People did that, but the shape of that shadow stuck with me the rest of the night. So, when the last guest left and I locked the front doors, I already felt uneasy. The cavernous lobby echoed with the metallic clicks of my keys as I stuffed them back in my pocket. The Majestic was grand, built in 1926, all gold leaf and velvet curtains, with a sweeping staircase and a chandelier the size of a small car. Beautiful, yes, but empty. That beauty twisted into something cold. I started my closing routine. 11:37 p.m. Check bathrooms. The men's room was fine. Empty urinals, puddles on the tile, a flickering fluorescent buzzing like a trapped fly. The stall doors creaked when I pushed them. Nothing. The women's room was the same, only the faint smell of perfume lingering, as if someone had just been there. 11:49 p.m. Sweep the aisles. I hated this part. The theater, with the lights dimmed low, felt like a cavern. Every footstep echoed too loudly, bouncing back like someone was walking just behind me. The shadows between seats looked deeper than they should. I started in the back and worked my way down, broom rasping against the carpet. It was mostly normal trash, popcorn tubs, straws, a lost mitten. But when I reached row H, my stomach tightened. Seat 12 had a handprint on it. Not dusty or dirty, more like someone with a damp palm had gripped the back of the chair. The print was faint, but unmistakable. I knelt, touched it. Still cold. Ranger, my dog at home, would have growled at that. I wished he were here. I swallowed hard and kept sweeping. 12:03 a.m. Check upper balcony. The Majestic still had its original balcony seating with these ornate iron railings from the 20s. Patrons didn't use it much anymore, so it always felt abandoned. Tonight, it felt occupied. Halfway up the stairs, I froze. There were footsteps above me, very faint, like someone pacing slowly. I waited. The footsteps stopped. "Hello?" My voice echoed up the stairwell. Nothing. "Sir, the building's closed. If you're still here, I have to lock up." Silence. I climbed the rest of the steps slowly, heart thudding in my throat. The balcony was empty. Rows of dusty seats, limp curtain ropes, and a faint smell of old upholstery. I walked down each row, brushing my flashlight beam across the seats. When the light passed over the far corner, someone stood up. A shape, just a shape, rose from the last row, tall and rigid. Before I could even inhale, the overhead light flickered back on, just a hiccup of electricity, and the row was empty again. I swept the flashlight across the seats, my hand shaking. Nothing. just the groan of the building settling. I didn't bother finishing the balcony check. I rushed back toward the stairs, nearly tripping over myself on the way down. At the bottom, I heard the soft creak of a chair somewhere behind me. I spun around. Every seat in the auditorium was still, but I knew, without any logical reason, that something had just sat down. 12:19 a.m. Projector room. The booth was warm from the big 35mm projector cooling down. I began rewinding the film reels for storage. The film slapped rhythmically as it wound onto the take-up reel. Normally it was a comforting sound. Not tonight, because behind it, under it, I heard whispering. Not words, just breathy, hushed murmuring, like someone talking to themselves in the next room. But there was no next room. The booth was only one square space. I turned off the rewind machine. The whispering continued. I backed toward the door slowly, never taking my eyes off the dark corner behind the projector. The whispering grew quieter, then stopped altogether. Something in the room moved. The air shifted, like a person passing you in a narrow hallway. I fled the booth and slammed the door behind me, locking it with shaking hands. My breath fogged the glass window in front of me. When the fog receded, I could see inside. A figure stood next to the projector, not moving, facing the door, facing me. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, stumbling back. The figure didn't react, but as I watched, the overhead bulb buzzed to life for a split second, and in that flash of light, the booth was empty again. I was sweating despite the cold. I needed to finish closing. I needed to get out. 12:31 a.m. Final walkthrough. This consisted of checking all doors, lights, and emergency exits. Simple work, on paper. In practice tonight, it felt like navigating a trap. I walked down the main aisle again, scanning for anyone hiding between seats. Halfway down, I felt it. That prickling on the back of my neck, the one every nerve in your body recognizes as someone is right behind you. I turned fast. No one. But the air behind me felt disturbed, as though someone had moved through it a second earlier. "Get a grip," I whispered. "It's an old building. Old buildings make noises. But old buildings don't breathe. And I swear, something behind me inhaled. A long, slow, deliberate breath. I bolted for the nearest exit door to make sure it was locked. It was. I turned back toward the auditorium and froze. Someone stood on the stage. A dark figure, tall and motionless, right at center stage in front of the curtain, just standing there as though waiting to perform. The stage lights were off, but a sliver of moonlight from the emergency exit window illuminated the outline of a suit jacket, the same silhouette from row H. My throat closed. "Sir?" I said, voice trembling. "You're not supposed to be here." The figure didn't move. I stepped forward once. Just once. The figure tilted its head toward me, a jerky, unnatural angle like a puppet's neck joint giving way. Every instinct screamed, "Run!" I backed up slowly, heading toward the lobby, keeping my eyes on the stage. When I reached the double doors, I flicked the auditorium lights to full brightness. White light flooded the room. The stage was empty. I sagged against the door, gasping. My pulse hammered in my throat. Enough. I was done. I was leaving the rest of the cleanup for tomorrow. 12:44 a.m. Exit. I grabbed my coat, keys rattling violently in my hands, and marched to the front doors. The lobby was silent. Too silent. I unlocked the door, pushed it open, and heard a chair creak behind me. I froze. Very slowly I turned my head. In the reflection of the lobby's display case glass, I saw it. Row H, seat 12. The silhouette sitting there, perfectly still, facing the lobby, facing me. I didn't look back directly. I slammed the front door shut, locked it from the outside. and ran to my car. I didn't breathe until I'd driven 3 blocks away. I quit 2 days later. The manager didn't ask why. I think he already knew. I think every employee eventually meets the shape in row H. They say the Majestic is still open today, still showing movies, still echoing with the hum of the old projectors. Maybe someone still sits in row H. Maybe they never left. And maybe, if you're unlucky enough to close alone, you'll hear that same creaking chair the moment you reach the door. A reminder that you were never the only one inside. I've been the night janitor at Elk Ridge High for 22 years, long enough to know every draft, every flicker of the fluorescents, every groan of the old heating system. Winter is when the place feels the most alive, at least to me. The halls echo differently when snow piles against the brick walls, like the building is listening. Every December, the school puts on a Christmas play. Every December, it goes the same way. Parents crying over their kids in handmade shepherd costumes, staff passing out candy canes, the principal giving a speech too long by 10 minutes. And every December, I stay after, sweeping up glitter and confetti while the place empties out. But this year was different. This was the first time I heard the voice. The play had just ended. A snowy Christmas Eve, they called it. A harmless little thing about village kids guiding a lost traveler to warmth. Lots of singing. Too much singing, if you ask me. The kind where everyone sways side to side, off-key but proud. I stood by the back doors as families bundled themselves in coats, scarves, and wet boots, chattering into the winter dark like a migrating flock. Parents laughed, teachers joked. The December chill drifted in with them as they left, frosting the air. Soon, it was just me. Well, me, and the smell of pine from the paper Christmas trees glued along the walls. At 60 years old, my knees don't like stairs much anymore, so I go slow when I step onto the stage. The kids left behind props, felt snowflakes, a fake lantern still glowing. I unplugged it, set it on the table, and checked the wings. Empty. Everything felt routine. I walked out into the aisles, flicking off the rows of lights. They clicked loudly, one after the other. Click, click, click. The room fell into a soft, bluish darkness, the only brightness coming from the faint exit signs humming in the corners. I started toward the door, ready to finish up the night with my sweeping route. That was when I heard it. A single voice. Clear, bright, childlike, singing. At first I thought it was just echo memory. When you've listened to kids sing for 2 hours straight, your head can ring afterward. But the voice didn't fade. It grew stronger. On Christmas Eve, the snowflakes fall. My heart dropped into my stomach. That was one of the songs from the play. I turned very slowly, not wanting to see what I already knew was there. The auditorium was pitch black. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stared into the rows of seats, listening. They drift and dance. They call us home. The voice came from the center of the room. Row J, maybe row K. A child's voice, but wrong. Too smooth, too steady. Like a recording from another time. My voice shook when I called out. Hey, who's in here? The play's over. It's time to go home. The singing stopped instantly. Dead silence. Kid, I tried again. Your parents leave you behind? Nothing. The exit signs buzzed softly. The whole room felt tight, like the air had thickened, like I was standing underwater and listening for a sound I didn't want to hear. Slowly, I reached for the switch panel on the wall and flipped the main lights back on. It took a full second for them to warm up, the fluorescents flickering to life. Rows of seats, stage, aisles. Nobody. Not a soul in the room. but the hairs on my arms stayed raised. There was a feeling, like someone had just been there, standing right where the song had come from. Then I noticed something else, a small, wet footprint on the carpeted aisle, kid-sized, bare, leading toward the middle of the auditorium. My breath felt trapped in my chest. I followed the footprints slowly. Each one glistened like melted frost. They led up the aisle, then turned left between two rows of seats. That's when I saw it. Snow. Real snow. Spread thin across the armrests and seat cushions, dusted like powdered sugar. A cold drift of it, right there in the middle of the heated auditorium, melting slowly into droplets that ran down the upholstery. The footprints passed right through it. "Jesus," I whispered. I bent down, touched the snow. Ice cold. Real. And then, and behind me, a giggle. Light. Breathless. Playful. I spun so fast my niece screamed. There was no one behind me. But the giggle continued, weaving through the room, bouncing off the walls. It shifted into a hum. On Christmas Eve, the snowflakes fall. "No," I muttered, backing away. "No, no, no." The humming grew louder, circling the seating rows as though the singer were skipping through them, unseen. I reached the doors, gripping the handle hard enough to feel the metal bite back with cold. Then the humming stopped. I shouldn't have looked back, but I did. A figure now stood on the stage, small, child-sized, a shape more than a person, pale like a smear of fog in the shape of a boy or girl. It stood perfectly still, head tilted, as if waiting for me to notice. Then, in a soft voice that seemed to float from everywhere at once, "You didn't clap for me." My throat closed so tight I couldn't breathe. The figure stepped forward, but its feet didn't touch the ground. Snowflakes drifted off its shape like it was made of winter itself. "Everyone else went home," it whispered. "But you stayed behind. You stayed for my song." I didn't," I stammered. "I didn't hear you. The play's over. Everyone's gone." "Not everyone." Its voice was suddenly closer, right next to me. I scrambled backward against the doors, but the auditorium was empty again, the stage bare, the snow gone. The footprints evaporated. Only silence, and the faint smell of cold December air. I stayed there a long time, my back pressed to the exit door, waiting for something to move, waiting for a voice, waiting for the child in the fog to reappear. Nothing did. Eventually, I turned off the lights again, hands shaking, and locked up. I didn't sing on the way home. I didn't hum Christmas tunes like I normally do. Instead, I sat in my truck with the heater blasting, watching the shadows between the trees across the parking lot. It's been a week since the play. Every night, when I walk the halls, I hear distant humming, the same tune the kids practiced for months. It comes from the vents, the stairwells, the empty classrooms. Last night, in the reflection of the trophy case, I saw someone standing behind me, small, pale, tilting its head the same way. And tonight, I'm scheduled to clean the auditorium again. Snow is falling outside, and somewhere in the dark, I swear, I can already hear the start of a child's voice warming up. On Christmas Eve,